Hey, a brand new episode of the Happy Productive Podcast is about to begin. It's time to be inspired by simple and actionable solutions for you and your business. If you're an established entrepreneur or just laying down the first brick of your future empire, the mantra is the same. We will flip any failure into a positive and use it to our advantage. This show is all about turning coal into diamonds. With the right plan and mindset, anything is possible. I'm Jennifer Dawn, your host, business coach, and founder of Best Planner Ever, and I'm here to help you achieve all your ambitious goals. Success is closer than you think. Let's do this. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show today. I'm so super excited. Mr. Blaine Bartlett is joining me today. And he is just a superstar, you guys. And the fact that he took time out of his busy day to be with us here today, I'm really, really excited about. And Blaine consults, advises, and coaches globally with leaders, executives, companies, and governments. He's an internationally recognized leadership development master. And through his work, he has personally delivered programs to and worked with more than 300,000 individuals, directly impacting more than 1 million people worldwide. He's the CEO of Avatar Resources, which is a global leadership consultancy he founded in 1987. He's worked with entrepreneurs and leaders of many of the largest companies and organizations on the planet to change the way leadership is used to foster compassionate capitalism. He's the author of 5 books, including the #1 international bestseller, Compassionate Capitalism, A Journey to the Soul of Business. Blaine, welcome to the show.
Jennifer, thank you for having me on. It is an absolute pleasure.
Oh, we're so excited to just dive in. But Blaine, I would love for you to just share a little bit of your story. You know, it's one thing to read a bio, but I just love to hear a little bit about your journey and what's brought you to where you are today.
Well, thank you for that opportunity. The bios can get a little stilted. I absolutely agree. I mean, I think when people get to know me, they begin to understand kind of my origin. And I grew up on a farm. And that origin informs a lot of what I'm about in life. And what I mean by that specifically is nature was probably my first and best teacher, and it remains that today. I mean, we were talking just before the show started about where I'm at, and I'm up on an island just northwest of Seattle. And I've got 11 acres here, and it's just nature. It's not developed particularly. So I walk in nature a lot. And where I'm going with this has to do with my work in business. And nature is probably the only truly free market economy that exists. There are no artificial constraints. The elements of nature just do what they do. There's no, controls on whether that fruit tree can, produce a fruit or not in that particular corner of the field. If it's there, it just does it. And whatever critter comes along, we'll pick it up and eat it or not. But the idea of nature being that free market system informs a lot of the work I do because early on in my career, as I started getting into business, and my first job was when I was 8 years old, skinning deer, my dad's butcher shop. But I started looking at the toxicity that I was experiencing in most organizations. And most large organizations did seem to be toxic to the human spirit. It's kind of like, you got to fit into this system. And if you don't fit in, we're going to compress it and we're going to twist it until you comply and go along. The human spirit doesn't like boxes. It doesn't like, spirit just in general doesn't like to be constrained. So that toxicity, I started examining it and going, okay, are there some different ways that businesses can actually operate? And that literally has informed all the work I've done since the early 1970s as I started on this journey. And that goes back a few years. So, but it's taken me on a pretty wild ride. I've lived all over the world, went to school in Europe, business school in Europe. I've lived in Japan, lived in Australia, worked, I'm an adjunct professor at Beijing University, which was interesting how that whole process began as they were emerging out of the constraints of communism and as a social political structure and into a marketing, kind of an environment, which doesn't have a social political component to it. It really is about how do we go to market as a country, and that kind of goes back to Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. Yeah. Now, you stop me when you want to here, because I will go down this rabbit hole
Oh,
and keep going. So I'll
no.
just stop myself here.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm a
Oh,
grandfather.
that's
I love to fish. I love the out of doors, nature. I'll just kind of circle back and close off of that. It is probably the greatest single teacher that I've ever encountered, and I love being able to reference nature as a way to run a business, and then we can see where that takes us.
Yeah, I love this so much. And you said so many wonderful things. And one of them in particular that you mentioned, the toxic nature of a lot of businesses. And I had shared with you, and for those listening, I met Blaine on Office Hours with David Meltzer, and that's where I first met Blaine. And I was just like, oh, I wonder if he'll come on the show. And he said yes, and it's absolutely wonderful. And I told a quick story about how my first business was at 8. I was selling apples. You were
Yep.
skinning deer, and I was selling apples. And I fell in love with this idea of my grandparents who were chiropractors, and we would spend our summers there. And it was just a safe haven. I came from a very abusive childhood, but we would spend the summers with our grandparents. And that was the time when we were just loved and nurtured. And they lived in Arizona on a property that had about just over about an acre and a half of all garden. And my grandfather had fruit trees and, all kinds of, they grew everything. They just, everything you can imagine, they grew it there on this property. But it was just this beautiful mix of earning a living, healing people, being, in life with each other, being with family. And in my world, like work life balance, that to me just felt like the most beautiful mix of work life balance because they were working, they were caring for their family. It was all intermingled. There was really very few set boundaries around it. But then, that's what I really grew up with and fell in love with. Later in my career, I did a stint in corporate America because I really loved being an entrepreneur. And I had my own software company and I grew that. And I was like, oh, I'm tired of software. I want to do something else. So I bought a log home company. And then it was the year the real estate market died. And I ended up having to like close it down. It was my first massive business failure. And I went into corporate for about 2.5 years. And it was probably one of the most toxic, unpleasant, horrible experiences
Yeah.
of my life. And even though I had success there, the environment was just, I don't even know how to explain it. I always it feels like a viper pit. I don't know how to explain it. Like, in Raiders of the Lost Ark when he falls into the pit with all the snakes and he's just like, that's kind of what it felt like to me. It just the environment itself thrived on really toxic, harmful behavior and hurting people. And this was a big $54 million company. It wasn't a tiny business. It was a good sized company that really from the CEO down was just a terrible place to be. And everybody was always so stressed out. And the day I left it, I just literally felt like I'd gotten out of jail. And the sad thing is, I think that there are a lot of companies like this. In fact, you very rarely hear in my work. I work with so many, business owners who are leaving corporate to start their own jobs, and so I hear a lot of this. And I would just love for you to speak to this as far as what you see in these toxic businesses, because obviously it drove you to not just do business a different way, but to also teach so many others that there is a different, better way of doing business.
Yeah, I love that opening, and I thank you for sharing that story. I mean, one of the things that intrigued me when we had you on the Office Hours show was your story about selling apples when you were 8. It was kind of, oh, a kindred spirit here. So the toxicity, yeah, it's interesting for me, and this is just kind of my take on it from my perspective. That toxicity is organized around a notion that the universe is limited. Okay, there's a limited supply of money. I've got to get my market share. And if I've got to get market share, I've got to take it away from somebody else. And so competition, by definition, is rooted in a mindset of scarcity. And scarcity is a contractive energy. Yeah, people get fearful. They get defensive and protective. You end up seeing walls being built, metaphorically. Turf battles begin to encroach into, all of this stuff. And the answer that most business owners will default to is, well, let's just get bigger. If we're bigger, we're not going to be as threatened. And there's a point where we move beyond what I would call human scale. And when it moves beyond human scale, it becomes very difficult to maintain a healthy connection to the work process, to my life. I come in and it's depersonalized. Everything seems to be about the business. Don't take it personally. It's just business. No, it's not. It's personal. If it's not personal, it has no business being in my life. And most people find that what they're doing out there is stuff that has no business being in their life. So, in the work that I do with my clients, one of the things that I'll invite them to consider, particularly if they're looking to start a new business, is to first of all consider 4 questions. And these aren't new questions. I mean, I was listening to something that Deepak Chopra was saying the other day, and I was kind of like, okay, he read my mind on this. The first question is what you're going to be doing, is it needed? If it's not needed, don't do it. Now that answer, pretty quickly gets, answered in the affirmative. If an entrepreneur is looking, there's a gap there, I can fill it. So there is a need, but that question needs to be answered. Is it needed? Is it helpful? Not only is it needed, but is the way that I'm going to go to market with what I'm going to market with, is it helpful? Then the next question, and this is the big one, does it bring joy? Does it create joy? Not just for the customers, but also for my suppliers. Does it create joy for the people that are working with me? And I don't mean giggles and grins and all that kind of stuff, but is it uplifting? Is it life affirming? And then the fourth question has to do with, is it healing? Is it healing? So where there's a gap, there's usually a wound that I'm trying to fill, but how I fill it makes a difference. So if I've got a yes to these 4 questions, is it needed? Is it helpful? Does it create joy? And is it healing? I've got a pretty good business model that I can actually take and run with. And that's where the whole notion of compassionate capitalism comes into play. You begin to operate your business from the perspective that I am connected. I'm connected to my vendors. I'm connected to my suppliers. I'm connected to fill in the blank, because compassion is impossible to experience without connection. And this is where we ends up with this toxicity. People are disconnected in many workplaces, so there is no compassion. And because there's no compassion, people feel used. They feel abused. I mean, all of that stuff comes in play. Business decisions are made, and it's the language is, it's not personal. It's just business. Compassion, if it's in play, will bring personal back into the equation. So now that sounds altruistic as hell. It really does. It really sounds altruistic, but it's doable. It's doable. Mm-hmm. It just requires leaders, requires a different kind of leadership.
Agreed. And leaders who are willing to embrace something different than just the bottom line, the bottom line. We always hear this as business owners that, it's got to be a profitable business, and we've always got to be looking at the bottom line. And you guys all know I do a lot of work in profitability and cash flow and all this stuff with my clients. I do. And it's important to pay attention to those numbers, because we want to stay in business and continue our mission. And so it is important to be responsible financially. But Blaine, when I hear you talk about these concepts, for me, it just feels like everything like raises to a higher level. Yeah. It becomes so much more than just money. Not that money isn't a component. I always feel like money is the byproduct. Like when you're really focused on the higher purpose and that mission, the money will almost take care of itself, because it becomes that byproduct. And as business owners, we have to look at that bigger picture and not get, I almost think, sucked into so much of those like more toxic concepts of, it's just got to be about the money because you're in business.
The purpose of business in many people's mind is to make money. That's the purpose that most people think that they're going into business for. in the work that I do, and from my perspective, and this kind of goes back to nature again, the purpose of business is to enhance the likelihood of thriving on this planet. And if I'm doing that well, if I'm enhancing the likelihood of you thriving by purchasing my product or service, you will beat a path to my door. And I will not have to worry about the money side of it. Now, I'll have to be fiscally responsible in terms of how I manage it. Yeah. But I will,
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
you feel like you're going to thrive as a consequence of purchasing my product. I mean, when I bought my first iPhone, I mean, there was pain in texting. I mean, if you remember going back to the early 1980s or 1990s, I guess it was, to do a B, you had to hit the 2 key 3 times or something like that. It was kind of like, God, this is
I
aggravating,
remember, yeah.
the pain. So, yeah, is it needed? Is it helpful? Does it bring joy? And is it healing? Yes, in all 4 counts. And I felt like I was going to thrive. I had the possibility of capturing some time and doing it, I mean, all kinds of stuff. But that's the idea behind it. And it brought a smile to my face. I found this on the web. Oh, speaking of the iPhone, it's talking to me right now. I found it on the web. It's always listening.
Yes, I love this so much. And so if you're a business owner and you're listening to this right now, and Blaine is probably like blowing your mind and making you think of things in a very different way, which is exactly what I want to have happen. A business owner who maybe is running their business and, they're not answering these questions. They're not even thinking about these questions. They're more focused on the day-to-day, the grind. There's a lot of business owners, they're stressed out, they're overwhelmed, they're not really loving their businesses. And so if you're that business owner, like what would you say to them as a first step to start to embrace some of these concepts that you're talking about here?
Great question. I think in that scenario that you've just described, the first step is to step back and take a deep breath. Do I love what I'm doing? If I love what I'm doing, then I can step back in. If I don't love what I'm doing, what do I need to do to bring love back into my experience of what I'm doing? So I don't love what I'm doing because I've got employees that aren't doing what I want. Well, let's back that up a little bit and say, okay, how do I need to be in order to have a loving relationship with these difficult employees? It will always come back to me. My external world is an outpicturing of an internal state of mind. I mean, I was running one of my masterclass programs today, and one of the areas, actually, the lesson for the masterclass today was around consciousness. The idea that consciousness is everything. Everything is born out of consciousness. And the specific assignment that I gave the folks today was observe your world, observe the people in your world, and not observe them from the perspective of objective data. What are they doing that you can see, touch, smell, that kind of stuff. Observe them from the perspective of what's the story you're holding in your mind about who they are and what they're up to. Because that story will manifest itself in their behavior, guaranteed. And if you want them to be different, if you want the circumstance to be different, start back here. How am I describing it? What's the story I'm making up? Because that story has an energetic dynamic to it, and that energy will get communicated the minute you enter the space. You don't have to say a word, but they're going to feel like, they're going to feel your sense of judgment. They're going to feel your sense of disappointment, of potential conflict. And they're going to feel all that before you ever open your mouth. And of course, they're going to respond defensively. They're going to respond protectively. I mean, all of that stuff comes into play. There's nobody out there but me. That's one way that I work with this. There's nobody out there. There's no thing out there except me. It's all an outpicturing of my internal state of my internal consciousness. Now, that's a big elephant to chew on for most people. I mean, it really
Yeah.
is. So, and the work I do is just kind of let's bite size this and just kind of play with it. What if? Let's take small little areas and just kind of play with it a little
Yeah.
bit.
Oh, I love this so much. It's so in alignment what we're up to right now as well. So we're running something called our 90-day, it's a breakthrough challenge where we work with a small group of business owners and we just taught the lesson. I just taught the lesson and we call it the truth mirror. You have to learn how to look inside the truth mirror because and we do this exercise where when you look at your employees or the people outside of you and you identify somebody you're complaining about. I mean, which is usually pretty easy for somebody to identify, find somebody who you're complaining about, my employee. I'm so angry at them because they never pay attention to the details. And so we take that and we reflect it back on ourselves and we change that into I'm so angry at me because I never pay attention to the details. And then we sit with that truth and we have to find the truth in it. And sure enough, it just, always happens that if you really sit with that long enough, you can find the truth in it and go, "Oh, wait a second. I'm not actually." I mean, sometimes, but often it's like I'm not really mad at them. I'm really seeing something in them I don't like in myself. And if I can reflect that back and see the truth of it, now I'm empowered to do something about it versus just being angry that, oh, my employees, they never do anything right. We've got to look at ourselves first. And I think that's exactly what you guys are working on as well, of just that heightened awareness. And it's really a different way of looking and thinking of things. And I find, and you may find this too, like a lot of people aren't always willing to look at themselves. Do you find that as well, that they aren't always wanting to like see the truth
Yeah,
or or really know what's going on or be courageous enough to really go inside and look at themselves when we talk about wanting to make change, in our businesses, it's got to start with change within ourselves.
absolutely. I mean, you go back to Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. Um, I mean, it is that it's
Mhm.
that simple and it's that difficult because to your point, it's a lot easier for most people to blame external circumstances for the experiences that they're having. If only that didn't happen, or if only they would fill in the blank. Anytime I say to myself, if only they would, or if only it was, by definition, I have abdicated responsibility for my experience and I've given the power to the other. By definition, they now control my destiny. They control my experience of life. And that's a no win proposition. Yeah, if only the economy was better. The economy is it is what it is. How can I thrive in this economic environment? There were more millionaires made during the Great Depression than any other time in American history. I mean, yeah, that's a statistic that is really sobering when you think about it. Opportunity is everywhere. If I have the agency and I claim the agency to actually do something. So to your point,
That's
Jennifer,
right.
I love that. Yeah, it's really difficult for many people to look at themselves and go, and the reason for that has to do with, I think, this is kind of a giggle. How did you learn about responsibility?
Oh, I would have to say for my grandparents.
Uh huh. Now, when did you ever hear the phrase "Who's responsible for this" when you were growing
Oh,
up?
of
Of
course.
course, yeah, yeah.
Of course.
I remember my brother
Yes.
and I were, wrestling horseplay in the living room, and one of us knocked over the lamp, and and mom came in. Who's responsible for this? That notion of responsibility gets conflated real quickly in many people's minds with blame. So when you
Mhm.
hear, "Do you want to take responsibility for this initiative?" Embedded in that is, are you willing to take the blame if it goes south? And most people subliminally,
Right.
subjectively kind of go, I don't think so. So when you're asking people to take responsibility for their experience in life, there's this embedded emotional response, and it's almost reflexively knee jerk. I don't want to take the blame for what I have in my life. And there is no blame in responsibility. You take the word apart, response able to respond. All it says is I'm able to respond in this environment, response able. It's neutral. And yeah, and this is one of the big unbundlings that needs to take place in many organizations. Yeah, who's responsible for this? Who's going to
Yeah.
take accountability for this? And accountability and responsibility, kind of translate in people's minds to blame.
Yeah. Yeah. Agree completely. 100%. But when you talk about taking responsibility and people who are willing to do it and not willing to do it, I really feel like responsibility and joy go hand in hand.
Yep.
Because if you're not willing to take responsibility, if you're not willing to like really own something and be like, yes, okay, I am willing to take the blame if this doesn't go right. Like, I'm willing to step into that. Like, I don't know, how can you ever really fully step into your joy
Yep.
if you're not willing to do that? Because it seems to me like, right? You just end up living a life of, "Oh, don't look at me, it's not my fault." And I don't think that you can really fully experience joy if you're not willing to take responsibility.
I could not agree with you more. It's, they go hand in hand. That the idea of agency, to be able to actually direct the flow and the course and the nature of my life, that by definition taps into the soul of an individual. And I mean soul not in a religious sense. The Greeks used to define
Yeah.
soul as being that which gives life or energy to anything, whether it was a piece of art, whether it was a tree, whether it was the ocean, whether it was a sunset. You tap into that soul, and aliveness is the consequence. When people are operating at that level and are connected to that experience of soulfulness, they are alive. They're joyful. I mean, you watch the Dalai Lama in interviews. He and Desmond Tutu were on a show that I saw just recently. Now Desmond is gone, and I got a beautiful photograph of he and I together in a meeting. But they were giggling. Two of the most significant
Mm,
religious figures on the planet were sitting like two little schoolboys giggling with each other. And they were alive. I mean, they were just alive. And the interviewer was going, "This is serious." And they're going, "Yeah, we know it's serious." Ha 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 ha. And they're just having a ball with it. You bring joy into, or the possibility of joy into a business, and by definition, you've got aliveness. And when you've got aliveness, you've got creativity. When you've got creativity, innovation begins to occur. And that, the imagination gets played with.
yeah.
Yeah. Carl Jung said, the philosopher, without the play of the imagination, nothing of consequence has ever been produced. And it's that play of the imagination that gets quashed in toxic environments. It's not your job to think. Yeah. We've got a strategy department that does that. So we'll let you know when we come up with the idea. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy. People are incredibly creative
Yeah, they really are. They really
if
are.
given the permission.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see though, I really can. I've been there myself when your business is growing, you might be financially, heavily invested, you've hired people, you feel like you're hanging out there, all these things are coming at you, you're trying to put out fires all day. I can relate to, and I have seen this happen with my clients too, where it can be easy to feel like you've lost your soul. In fact, I've had many clients come to me and just say, "Jen, the business has sucked my soul."
Yeah.
And that's one of the things actually I love those clients because I love helping them like step back into their joy and start to love their business again. And when they can start to love their business again, it starts to thrive in a whole new way.
Yeah.
And I would just love to hear from you, like when you work with clients who come to you and they just say, Blaine, this business has just, sucked my soul dry. What do you do? Where do you start with them of helping them to kind of rediscover and find the joy in their business again?
Great question. One of the very first things I do, and I'll put this in the domain of a coaching engagement with them, where I'm actually coaching them one on one. I'll bring them up to the island for 2 days. Get them out of their environment, break state, so that they have a fresh perspective. They will sit on the deck here and look out at the ocean. The ferry, you got to take a ferry to get here, so it's a 15-minute decompression ride. They leave everything behind. So there's a lot of ontological design that goes into that. And part of it, I mentioned ontological design. I want to design an environment that designs them in return. So we will sit long and talk much. Really, tell me how you think. Tell me what's up. I want to understand how they're processing information. That's the first step in this. And then we start taking a look at, okay, environmentally, what are you going back into? What needs to shift that you can actually, in a fairly short order, shift from an environmental perspective? And it can be something as simple as change your chair out. I mean, because I'll ask sometimes, how comfortable is the chair that
Mhm.
you sit in? Well, it's not so comfortable. Get a new chair. That's the first thing I want you to do when you go back to the office. Get a new chair. Sit comfortably. Start designing the environment so it gives you a life affirming, yes, I'm in the right place.
Mhm.
And that's a subjective. I'm in the right place. It feels good to be here. Then we can start leveraging that. It
Right.
all starts with mindset. And that doesn't address the economic conditions. It doesn't address, the employees or anything else. It's just starting with get yourself centered. And that centering
Yeah.
is not centered in, oh my God, it's horrible. That centering is in an expansive place that is, peaceful. You can kind of breathe here.
Yeah.
And if you can breathe here, you can breathe someplace
Yeah.
else. So we'll begin to leverage that. So that, kind of the first places that I would start with it.
Yeah. I love that so much because I love that what you said was it started by removing them from their environment and putting them into a different environment, right? Because sometimes we get so caught up in all of the day to day that we need to step outside and go into a completely different literal physical space where and I love on the island, you're out in nature, you're surrounded by nature. There's something about nature that's just so grounding and so comforting, and you start to be able to see more clearly than when you are, at your desk and everybody's coming at you or in that, work busy, fast-paced work environment. But I love that you said that. And one of the things that we do are retreats where a couple times a year we will go to different places. This year we're going to Montana, we're going to
Mhm.
Costa Rica,
Hmm. I'm
and but
in.
the whole idea behind it is to get yeah, come on. Come to Costa Rica. Our Montana retreat, we pair it with, a Spartan race.
Uh,
So we do 3 days of coaching. So this year we'll go to Montana, we'll have 3 days of coaching, and then we all go out and we do a Spartan race together, which is obstacle course racing, and you're on a mountain. It'll be in Montana, it'll be on a mountain, you'll go over obstacles, you're out in nature, which is a beautiful thing, but you're really challenging yourself. And so we love to do these because it just gets a business owner completely out of their normal day to day. They can think clearly. We surround them with support and resources. They learn all this new stuff. And then I make them go do a Spartan race and we put all that stuff into
yeah,
practice. And, you want to talk about mindset? Everything starts with mindset. It absolutely does. And on a course like this, you will find so many times where your brain will say, I can't do this, I can't do this. And then you
yeah,
try. And even if you're not perfect, you still try and you overcome and you start to learn not to listen to that part of your brain that says you can't do something because you really prove to yourself, wait a second, I can actually do a lot more than I thought I could do. And then you take that back, with you into the business. So I just love so much that you started with, get out of your day to day, get out in nature, go somewhere else, surround yourself with somebody who can help you, you know, ground and heal and just see things from a different perspective. And it's almost like from that moment of clarity, you can now step back into your power. You can now start to make those changes that you need to make versus sitting at your desk crying, woe is me. All this stuff is happening to me. But when you can step back into your power, you realize you can control these things. And it's just one thing at a time. Now you can just make a little change, a little change, a little change. But now you're in the driver's seat.
exactly. Essentially, what I do and what you're describing is you interrupt a patterned way of behaving, a patterned way of thinking. And anytime you
Yeah.
interrupt a pattern, it stops the process and you can insert something new. If you try to insert something new when a pattern is running,
Yeah.
it will never take root because the pattern is so busy, just kind of running itself. And there's no room for that
Yeah.
new idea,
Yeah.
that new behavior, that new thought to actually settle in. So interrupt the pattern.
Agree completely. Blaine, one thing that you did that was just so impressive to me. So after you and I connected after the Dave Meltzer office hours, we connected on LinkedIn, and you and Dave actually both did something that really, really impressed me. And it was a simple little thing, but after we connected, you both said, "Please let me know what I could do to be in service to you." That doesn't happen that often, ever. And with somebody like yourself, who is clearly very, very successful, you've inspired and influenced so many people. I was so touched at just this little sentence that you wrote that said, Please let me know what I could do for you to be in service to you. Tell me a little bit about that because you just don't see that these days with really very many people at all. And I would just love to hear, where does that come from?
That comes from walks in nature. It
Oh.
really does. When you look at nature, Jennifer, I mean, it is my greatest teacher, continues to be. It was back when I was a kid. There is nothing in nature that serves as a center of accumulation. Everything in nature is a center of distribution in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, I mean, nature just like I go, there's no constraints. So nature, the fruit tree bears fruit and the fruit drops. No worry about recompense. No worry about is it going to be used right. It's just kind of no. The fruit tree just kind of gives what it has. In business, most businesses find themselves, and most business leaders are focused on, and this is that competitive scarcity mindset. I want to be a center. I've got to accumulate. Centers of accumulation. I see myself as a center of distribution. That's how I pattern my life. What can
Mm.
I give away? I live in an abundant universe. I live an abundant life. What can I give? What can I give? Yeah, it'll be used or it won't be used, but it does me no good to hold on to it. So that's, literally where that comes from. When you read Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Wattles, Wattles has
Right.
got something, and I think it's chapter 11. Being a person of increase
Mhm.
is the title of this particular chapter. Being a person
Mhm.
of increase. And a person of increase leaves behind them that feeling of well-being. Through the passage, my passage and, through your space, did I uplift you? Did I leave you with something that you felt that was a nice interchange? That was a nice interaction. And there was no call for
Yeah.
trading. It was just kind of like, I left you feeling better. And this is, for leaders,
Yeah.
how do people feel about themselves when they're in your presence? If they don't feel uplifted, if they don't feel empowered, you're doing something that needs not be done because you're compromising your health, their health, and the health of your organization. How do people feel about themselves when
Yeah.
they're in your presence? And that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So I'm sorting for that. My wife and I both, we actually organize our lives around that, and we have a ball with it. How can I be a center of distribution? How can I be a person of uplift today?
I love this. I got to tell you, Blaine, such a breath of fresh air on LinkedIn. When just all day long you're getting just hammered by people on LinkedIn, connecting with you to sell you something. Just, it's just relentless. And it's almost to the point where you're just like, I don't even want to connect with anybody on there. And when I saw your message on LinkedIn on this platform, which is a great platform, it was just such a breath of fresh air. And for a moment, I was just like, wow, imagine if every business owner, interacted on LinkedIn like that. How could I be a distribution network instead of everybody give me, give me, give
Yeah,
me?
yeah, that's compassionate capitalism. It's predicated on connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Tell us just a little bit. I know we're going to be out of time, Blaine. I can talk to you all night because I just love all this stuff so much. Tell me just a little bit, or tell our audience just a little bit about the book.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, you mentioned Dave. Dave and I co-wrote the book. We kind of joke about it. I had it about 85% done when I said, David, you got some stories. I need to have these stories in the book. Let's finish this book off together. So we co-wrote the book, and we truly did. The
Yeah.
idea has to do with the way that capitalism is actually conducted today. I knew that there was a better model. Yeah, crony capitalism, and that's essentially what we
Okay.
have today is crony capitalism, particularly on the large scale. When Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, yeah, he talked about something that he referred to as enlightened hands of commerce, around enlightened self-interest. The invisible hands of commerce, enlightened
Hmm.
self-interest. I scratch your back, you scratch mine, because as a trading partner, I want you to be healthy. If you're not healthy, it's going to compromise my ability to
Hmm.
be healthy. So that reciprocity was built into the notion of the wealth of nations. And you fast forward, and then it got really skewed when we start looking at rational self-interest, which was what Milton Friedman was talking about with the purpose of business is to make money. Ayn Rand talked about it
Hmm.
specifically. She called capitalism a rationally self-interested model, economic model.
Mhm.
If you go back to Adam Smith, compassion was based on connection. I care about you. I care about your success because I feel connected.
Mhm.
And that connection is actually fairly ecumenical. I mean, it really is fundamental to our thriving potentially. So when I wrote the book, and David and I wrote the book Compassionate Capitalism, was a journey back to this, to that soul that gave life to that economic model that Adam Smith first wrote down. Raj Sisodia and John Mackey, who are both good friends of mine, John founded or co-founded Whole Foods, and Raj is a professor, business professor at Babson University. They wrote a book called Conscious Capitalism, and that actually spawned the conscious capitalism
Mhm.
movement. Well, I had a number of
Mm.
conversations with both of them about there's something missing in conscious capitalism that doesn't get addressed explicitly, and it's compassion. Compassion is a behavioral analog to consciousness. It's one thing to be conscious and aware that there's ripple, that there are multiple stakeholders, not just shareholders. But compassion is how that gets
Mhm.
translated into practical business process. Do I behave compassionately? Do I behave as if
Mm.
your success is critical to my success? I will take care of that. And that's kind of how can I be of service? How can I be of service? You ask your vendors that, you ask your suppliers that, you ask your customers, how can I be of better service to you? That's all born out of connection. And it's a compassionate move.
Mm.
And if businesses operated in that fashion, I think we'd see some things very differently in what we call reality. Wealth disparity would begin to
Yeah.
shrink. Just a lot of social ills that are present as a consequence of our current economic models, I think. So that's the thesis behind it.
Yeah, I love it so much. And the companies that you work with where you help them to embrace this concept, I'm just really curious, like what do you see? What happens within these companies that makes them different when they start to embrace this?
Well, I remember I gave a talk at the Renaissance weekend a number of years ago. Yeah, and this was when I was first beginning to put this model together. And it was to a group of Wall Street bankers. And my mom used to have this phrase, yeah, it was like a lead balloon in a pin factory. This idea did not float
That's
well.
I was gonna say, how'd that go, Blaine? Probably not so hot.
Well, but it helped me refine the messaging a little bit here. Initially, and I've been doing this for a long time now, but initially, if I go back to the 80s, when I first started really talking about this in some detail, I'd get a lot of eye rolls. I mean, this is, boy, what are you smoking? Sort of a conversation. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
and more and more, I see more and more that business leaders, entrepreneurs, particularly millennials, are adapting and adopting this sensibility into the way that they do business. Raj
Yeah.
Sisodia, he wrote, I hate him for this. He had the best book title I've ever seen. And I want this book title. It was a book that he wrote that was called Firms of Endearment. Firms of Endearment. Love
Oh,
the
that's a
title.
good one.
And
Yeah, that's a good
it
one.
was a case study I think he had 14 companies that he'd identified that had love as a very specific operational value. Now, it was executed in different ways depending on the company, but he said love will, yeah, and he compared it to Jim Collins's Good to Great. He compared it to the S&P index. These firms of endearment, as he called them, outperformed all of these other companies by not just a little bit. It was a huge differential. People were engaged, emotionally engaged. Because they were emotionally engaged, they were creative, they were able to handle adversity. They were, resiliency was in place because love, in the way, not, I love you, but love in terms of care. I've got your back. What can I do for you? How can I be of service? All of those things, compassion, were built into the system. And it made a difference. It made a business case difference. And that's, I mean, if there's documentation around compassionate capitalism working, this would be part of that whole process.
I love this so much. And so how do you find that you balance being compassionate and loving, and then also still being able to turn a profit.
Yeah.
And here's why I ask this because, a lot myself, I love to just give. I would just give all the live long day and never worry about money ever. But if I do that, I would be out of business. Let's face it, I would be out of business. And so I have a lot of clients as well that they want to love, they want to give, but they also need to balance that with still staying in business and making money. And so how do you balance those two concepts together?
Oh, I love that question because what it points to is what many business owners think of as their primary asset, which is their profit. Okay, that's put that on the
Mhm.
ledger sheet. There's all kinds of other assets. Having the workplace be an inspiring workplace it's kind of like, yeah, if I'm an employer of choice and I'm working for you, what do I get to have, do, or be that I wouldn't get to have, do, or be by working for your competitor? And then your job as a leader
Mm.
or the manager is to ensure that by working for you, I have access to getting that thing that I personally say is valuable. It could be more time with my family. It could be, all kinds of different things. But if I'm doing that, I'm going to be not focusing on, I need to give you a bonus. I need to, monetary. There's a lot of non-fiscal assets, intellectual, heartfelt, societal, relational. I've got relational currency up the wazoo. How can I give some of this away? Yeah, that sort of thing. So there's that piece of it. But the other thing, and this, I really think this is important, Jennifer, when people think of compassion, they think of soft and squishy. True
Mm.
compassion has a very hard edge to it. What's it in service of? And if my business model is so strong that I don't want to jeopardize it, it puts me in a position of making some pretty hard choices. How I make those choices makes a difference. It makes a difference. I remember, Charles Schwab back in '08, they had to lay a bunch of people off. And the way that they laid them off was they gave them stock options that were redeemable at any point in time. And
Mm.
it was significant stock options. And the bet was you're taking, you drew the short straw here and we're going to have to, lay you off. But we're doing this so that the organization can not only survive, but eventually thrive. And your sacrifice, quote unquote, here will be rewarded on the upside over here with these stock options. So if we're actually successful in turning this thing around, your stock options are going to be more than enough to compensate the monetary hit that you just took. So, you get creative in terms of how you actually do this. And I think that's a great example of how, one company did a pretty good job of it. The Container Store,
I
same
would say
story.
so.
Talking to the founder of the Container Store not too long ago, and Kip was talking about, the downturn in I think it was in '08 also. Yeah, instead of letting people go, the whole team came together and everybody took a reduction in salary and they started job sharing in different ways. They let nobody go. They let nobody go.
Mm.
And they got creative about how they kind of managed the resources that they had available to them. It was compassionate to do it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Business decision. Yeah. If you can weigh your business 51-49 towards compassion,
Yeah.
you're probably going to end up being okay.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. When COVID hit, and like you, all my clients are business owners, and so many of them saw their revenues. Many of them, their revenues just almost disappeared overnight,
Mhm.
and it was a very, very scary time. And for a lot of my clients, it was, well, Jen, we love you, but business coach, like we have to cut things. And I'm like, I'm your business coach, and I'm telling you right now, you got to cut a bunch of stuff to stay afloat, and that's what we did. But I said to all my clients, "You know what, guys? We're in this together." And I comped coaching or greatly discounted it for 3 to 4 months so that we could figure out strategies and what we needed to do to keep those businesses alive. And the amazing thing is that that year, almost all my clients had record-breaking profit years.
Yep.
And whereas they went from, literally being in tears, crying, really afraid I'm gonna lose my business, to having record-breaking profit years from just pivoting. And but, that was all about compassion. It was all about forget the money, let's just all pull together and we're gonna get through this. And we did. And so many of them actually came out so much better and so much stronger. And products were developed that wouldn't have been developed. And I mean, no disrespect when I say that our joke internally was COVID is the gift that keeps on giving, because we just kept finding more and more ways to take, not advantage of the situation, but find opportunities in the situation to create new products and have better businesses and pull together. And it was actually ended up kind of being a good thing for
Oh,
for not except for all, I mean, no disrespect, obviously,
no.
to all the people who suffered
Yeah,
from it, but anything that's out there, right? We can bring compassion into any situation.
absolutely. And what we think is horrible, you give it 8 months and it may be the greatest gift you ever got.
And that's the truth.
I mean, we don't, we have such a finite window of time that we reference about what life is. And it's this window, it's a narrow window. It's an expansive universe, and it's always growing. The nature of life is to grow. So even though there's a catastrophe right now, the nature of life is to grow. I lost 98% of my book of business in 2020. January 2020, February. I mean, it just, because most of it was overseas.
Yep.
And it was one
Yeah.
of the most creative, the last 2 years, 2020, through 2022, creative, dynamic, restful. I mean, now I live on an
Hmm.
island, and I
Yeah.
absolutely acknowledge that I'm probably in better shape than a lot of people were going into this. But there was leveraging possibilities that could occur out of this. It's kind of like I've got time to write again, so I wrote a new book, got that one
Hmm.
done. Developed a couple of different programs. We never did anything on a virtual basis. It was nothing was delivered digitally. Probably about 80% of my business is delivered
Mm.
digitally now. And I'm not getting on airplanes, which thank you, Lord. I've got five and a half
Thank you.
billion miles.
Thank you.
I don't need another air mile.
No. No, no. Oh man, that's amazing. That is amazing. So many of our clients did have to move more into the digital space.
Mhm.
I had been in the digital space, so for me that was not a shift I had to make, and I was so grateful that I was already there, but it helped me to help my clients, also make that shift. But truly it was a period of time that was our joke. It was just like the gift that kept giving, because you just could keep getting more and more from it if you were able to actually see it for what it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And not be,
Awesome.
catastrophizing, whatever that word is, awfulizing, a different way of putting it,
Yes.
awfulizing. Oh my God, this is
Yeah.
awful.
Yes. Oh my god. Oh my god. It's so terrible. Yes, I know. There was a lot of that going on too, but
Yeah.
oh, Blaine, I know we're out of time, but gosh, just such a wonderful conversation. I could just talk with you all day. I love all this work that you're doing. It's so in alignment with the work that we're doing, and it's just really nice when to meet a kindred spirit and to get to know you better. And I know that our listeners are going to get so much value from our time together today.
It's been my pleasure. I love this conversation. And, you set off, before the show started about let's not an interview, let's just have a conversation. And I love conversations. Life happens in conversations. So I think
Yes.
we got a good shot at having a good life right now.
I agree completely. All right, really quickly, tell everybody where they can find you, where they can buy the book.
BlaineBartlett.com is probably the easiest. I'm on all the social platforms, LinkedIn, you mentioned, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and it's all Blaine Bartlett. The book, Compassionate Capitalism, on my website, BlaineBartlett.com, there's a link that you can go to, or you can go directly to Amazon. That's, for a lot of people, probably the easiest, particularly if you're not in the country. And if you go onto the website, there's also a free ebook on there, Tapping into the Soul of Business, which is kind of a fun and interesting read. I've got a couple of models in there about some of the stuff that we've been talking about.
Oh, I love that. I love the soul of
So
business.
that's where you'd find it. BlaineBartlett.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Blaine, for being here with me today. I really appreciate it.
Jennifer, absolutely my pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. All right, you guys, I know you could get so much from today's show. Soak it up, listen to it again, and get out there and have a happy, productive day. Bye, guys. I hope you found today's episode of the Happy Productive Podcast inspiring. Every successful business is formed by a set of small, consistent, and attainable steps. If you want to learn more, come visit us at jenniferdawncoaching.com to take your next step and learn how to meet your business goals. On our website, you're going to find free resources along with links to the life-changing coaching programs that have transformed the lives of so many of our clients, including the Coaching Academy and our Unbreakable retreats. Many of them started their journey by listening to this podcast. That's it. Thank you for listening and stay tuned for our next episode.